Hello again! We've already covered some practical considerations regarding producers and mostly publishing messages. Now it would be a good time to speak more about consumers and especially the potential performance issues and how to address them. This might be a funny conclusion after hearing that Kafka is so super performant, but the truth is that it's easier to have poorly performing consumers than you think. And why? Well, because it's not just fetching messages from Kafka, it's processing them in your Rails application. So the problem will be really with the kind of the logic that is implemented for the consumers. It's important to make them as lightweight as possible, and literally every database query might matter, especially some more complex ones. So if you want to achieve the maximum possible performance, this is something definitely worth focusing on. What exactly would be lightweight consumers? The first point, as already mentioned, would be making sure that they perform the lowest possible number of database queries, and these queries would ideally be lightweight as well. Don't do anything heavy in these consumers like computing complex stats, at least if you don't have to. So preserving causality of the events might have also some impact here. Ideally, if you can, you would handle some potential side effects as background jobs, in Sidekick for example. So the consumer would do something lightweight and the side effects of this lightweight thing would be handled in the background jobs. We know how to optimize things inside consumers, but what about consumers' number? Ideally, you would have them as many as possible. The problem though is that there is a limit. You can have at most as many consumers as there are partitions for all the topics, as within a consumer group there can only be one consumer consuming from a given partition. So somehow the solution would be to have more topics and partitions, which is definitely a way to optimize throughput, but this is not as easy as creating hundreds of partitions. Huge number of partitions doesn't come for free, so be careful here. As far as the potential problems go, I will go into more details about this in advanced Kafka part. But fortunately, there are more ways to optimize throughput on the consumer side. One of them would be having a custom partition assignment strategy. Kafka uses Ruby Kafka under the hood, which uses by default a round-robin strategy. It might be okay for a uniform distribution of partitions, although that might not always be the case, and in general, this won't be the ideal strategy for every application. But this is customizable. You can specify your own strategy, but to do that well, you need to have a clear idea how messages are distributed over not only topics but specific partitions. So it might turn out that some consumers would ideally be assigned to only a single partition, and some of them could even be assigned to multiple partitions. This is really highly dependent on the specific use cases. Good monitoring is your friend here for having a good understanding of what's going on in Kafka, especially monitoring consumer lags for every partition. There is also one more way to optimize throughput, although this is a bit more extreme one and it has its own consequences which can be serious. You can use Kafka Sidekick backend, which is extracted to a separate gem. With Sidekick backend, messages will be pushed to Sidekick as jobs from Kafka workers instead of having them processed directly in Kafka workers. So this can result in a huge throughput increase, as the more Sidekick workers you have, the more messages you can process in parallel, and pushing stuff to Redis from Kafka workers is not really an expensive operation. But this approach has its consequences. The first one being Redis itself. Messages are stored in memory, so you'd better make sure you have enough memory and you process messages fast enough. Also, Redis needs to be properly configured to minimize the chance of losing jobs. And also there is Sidekick. If you don't use dedicated features from Sidekick Pro like Superfetch, it's almost guaranteed that you will lose jobs eventually, so be careful. Thanks again for this part of the mini course. We are getting closer to the end of it, and what we have left is advanced Kafka and advanced Karafka, so see you next time where I will be covering some more advanced aspects.